In this video, we're going to make a more extreme version of a fender flare using Fusion 360 and scan data off an MR2. Hey everyone, this is Matt with Learn Everything About Design, and in the last video in this series, we created a fender flare using Fusion 360 forms. Now, this fender flare was meant to be sort of inspired by the typical Rocket Bunny style, where the fender flare doesn't come all the way down to the bumper, it sort of ends and you can see the tire from the back. I think it's a pretty cool style, it's very unique, and of course a lot of people are copying it, so why not? But now I want to talk about actually going a bit more extreme than that. So we're going to come in and we're going to hide the fender flare that we created, and we're going to start creating one that is more in line with the entire fender. Now, remember again that the stock body has this sort of fender flare, and based on the comments, people are telling me that this fender actually entirely unbolts, which is not common for a typical front engine rear-wheel drive car. This is all going to be welded on or part of the unibody in most cases. So having this be able to unbolt is kind of cool. But what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at making another sort of stick-on fender flare. And again, full disclaimer, when I record these videos, it's generally my first time through, so I haven't actually modeled this yet. So we're just going to kind of explore the shape, see what we can create with no idea or intention to start with. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started and create another form body. So again, I want to start with a cylinder, and I sort of want to build out the wheel arch. So the same thing that we did on the last one, I'm going to set the height faces at 1. The height can be pretty small. I'm going to make it 15 millimeters. It doesn't really have to be very drastic, but I am going to increase the number of divisions. And instead of 16, I'm actually going to do 32. I'm going to go really, really high res on this one. So from the front, I need to move that over, obviously, and I need to get rid of some of this. So I'm just going to box select, and I'm going to move it over to the position we want. Now, since this is extreme, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take it out a little bit farther, and I want to make sure, at least for the time being, that I don't rotate this to match the tire. I want to make sure that I leave it vertical. And the reason I want to do that is because I want to make sure that I can make use of X, Y, and Z when I'm moving in plane. As soon as I start to rotate things, at least at this stage, it's going to make it more complicated. But I am going to stick this one out just a little bit further. And of course, we can take the mesh and we can pull it out further. But again, a little bit more extreme, a little bit wider. It's going to accommodate probably like a 9, maybe even a 10-inch tire, very, very tightly tucked. So that gives us a good starting point. I'm going to click so that I can deselect that. And again, when we are selecting, we want to make sure that our selection filters and priorities and our tools are all based off of what we want to select. So if I get out of the edit form dialog and I go to my filters, you can see that we have mesh bodies turned on, which means that we can actually select this. But when we go into edit form, the mesh body is not selectable. So if you're trying to pre-select anything, make sure that you do expand and go to your selection filters. When you're in the tool edit form, you're not going to be able to select the mesh body anyways, but just keep that in mind. So this one, what I plan to do is come all the way down to where the side skirt or the sill would be. So we're going to come up to this seam here. And I think what I want to do is I want to carry it around this intake. I don't know if I'm actually going to incorporate the intake or not, but I want to go to this upper portion. I want to go around the intake and I want to come down to here. And on the back side, I still want to leave some of it open. I don't want to come all the way down to the bumper. So I might take this up to the body line here and leave the stock bumper. So that's just kind of my initial thought. I'm going to look at just the fender portion. And then, of course, we could add or create another extra little piece here. Let's just see how it goes. The reason that we're making that determination is we need to figure out what to delete. So I want to select and delete that. And then I probably want to get rid of a couple more faces. Let's view this from the side, see where that lines up. So it looks like maybe we can come to that line on the bumper. That might be a good line, at least for right now. And it's a good idea for us, we can keep a little bit more and then adjust it later if we want to. So I'm going to go back to edit form. And again, like we did before, I want to start manipulating the shape to be a little bit closer to the wheel arch. And again, generally I work in box display mode, at least at the very start of a design. For this, because we are dealing with a scan and I want to position the wheel arch in smooth display to match that scan, I am working in smooth display. And it's not something I typically do, but to get the shape close, we want to use the smooth display now. And then we can always switch to box display and we can clean things up and make it a little bit more symmetric. It's hard to do right now with just this thin lip. And that's something that we obviously will need to spend a little bit of time on. But again, this is a starting point. We can always remove or add edges and clean this up later if we need to. But in general, if we were designing the car body or we were designing this from scratch, we would do extremely low polygon count, extremely low face count, and then we would sort of add to it from there. All right, so now that I got the starting position of where I want that wheel arch, I'm going to double click the outside. And just like we did before, Alt and Control on a PC, and it's going to be Option and Command on a Mac. And I'm just going to pull that lip out. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger than we did last time. And then I'm going to continue manipulating these. And again, the intent here is to keep them a consistent width. And I also want to make sure that they're pointing toward the center of the wheel. So that's going to be my reference for all of these edges. You'll note that as they start to point a little bit more extreme, that the shape kind of works itself wider. It's not quite right. And part of that is because when we're extruding, what we're doing is we're extruding from our selected edge. There is actually another way if we have a selection point that is in plane with the wheel. And actually, while we're doing this, let's go ahead and Control Z and let's undo and let's explore that. So I'm going to create a sketch. I'm going to use the side plane. And what I want to do is I want to just put a point where I think the center of the wheel is. So I'm just going to place a point right there. And again, in this case, this is the mesh where we actually raised the wheel up 30 millimeters to lower it. So that's about where I think that is. I'm going to finish that sketch. And notice that the sketch point is here. So if we use this as our pivot point and we extrude out, it's going to completely go the wrong direction. It's going to go from here and it's going to go outward. So I actually want to move that sketch. And we can do this inside the sketch as long as we have, let's go ahead and right click and edit the sketch. So as long as we're inside of the sketch, we can move that point if we have 3D sketch turned on. So I'm going to select the point. I'm going to hit M for move. And I just want to bring it to the location where it's matching the end of this. And you can see it's 915 millimeters. That's where it's going to end up. And I'm going to say OK and finish the sketch. Now, theoretically, and again, this is the first time going through this, but theoretically, if I set my pivot point there, I won't have to do a lot of post-processing on that extrude. So let's go to the right view. We're going to do Alt and Control. And you'll notice that, again, it's kind of moving out how I would not expect. So before I extrude, I'm going to set the pivot point to here. Now I'm going to hold down Alt and Control. And you can see now I'm getting that very smooth, consistent, everything is pointing directly to that. And it just saves me a little bit of time having to do it manually. It's more consistent. When we did it originally off the selection, you'll notice that the upper sections were much thinner and these lower sections were quite a bit wider. So this gets me closer, and I can, of course, do some manipulation and get it, more in line with what I want. Potentially change the shape over here. But for right now, that looks pretty good. And now we've got our lip. And this is not to say that we always have to have a lip like this. In some cases, we might want to actually smooth that out and roll it. But almost every car is going to have some sort of crease here. And adding that detail, extra edges to control it this time is just more work than you need to do. So keep it as simple as possible at this stage. I know we've got a lot of divisions here, but keep it as simple as possible. Now that we have this sort of starting point edge, the way that we did this before was we held down Alt and we extruded it and we built out our fender flare. That is not going to be the process this time. And so that is not going to work because we're going to have a more intricate shape. We need to determine if we just want to push everything out and maintain some of the stock detail, or if we want to make extra intake scoops or make it pretty wild. So at this stage in the process, this is when I'm going to go into box display and I'm going to begin building this out piece by piece. So I'm going to take these lower two edges, I'm going to just select both of them, and I'm going to hold down Alt and I'm going to bring them forward. I'm going to place them at some point. I don't really know what the shape of this is going to look like yet. Before I finish this up, I'm going to start to scale them to get them in vertically. And one of our subscribers mentioned that you can just actually hit 0 in the dialog box, and it's something that I honestly have never really done before. So I've just manually scrolled it close. So just hitting 0 will get you close to that value and get it actually vertical. So that's pretty cool. You can go ahead and do that. Next, I'm going to hit Alt, and I'm going to do this again, just extruding it forward, and I'm going to go pretty close to that edge there. I just want to bring it close to that edge, and that's going to be sort of our defining shape. Before I start to scale this stuff down and fit it to the door, I want to go to a top or a right view, and obviously that is not going to work. We need to pull it in closer to the body. So I'm going to take those edges and I'm going to pull them in fairly close to the body. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect, but that looks pretty good. I want it to be just a little bit in front of the mesh. And then we're going to take this one as well. And what I'm looking for here is really going to be driven by how we want the shape of the fender. So in a lot of cases, I say that we always want to maintain those straight lines. We want to go from one point to the next to maintain those lines. And while that's true, this case, when we're looking at it from the top, what we're doing is we're figuring out how we want to flare this out. Now, we're going to be going from the door seam, and we're going to be building out. So I want to keep it kind of close to the body here, not exactly in line. And then I want it to begin to sort of flare out and widen, have it be a much more drastic look. So that's a good starting point there. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to select both of these edges, and I'm going to begin scaling them down. And here's another thing that we need to be mindful of. If we want them to be scaled from the bottom, if we want to keep that bottom position exactly the same, this is the time where we reset our pivot. We put the pivot at the bottom, and then when we scale them, they're just going to move down vertically. If you need to keep the bottom or the top at a specific location or the middle, then you just set the pivot point there. The reason that we would want to maybe scale them vertically or make them shorter vertically is if we want to have a more drastic side skirt or something. I'm going to assume in this case that we're going to just keep them about where they are. But again, that's kind of why we would do that. And then as we look at this from the front, notice that this bottom edge is quite a ways away. So I want to begin pulling this in, and note that we are starting to sort of make that shape as it flares out. And the center one here, I'm going to view this from the front, and I want to pull this one in as well. One thing to note is when you're using just the arrow, it's going to snap at certain increments. So if we're looking at it in this view where we've zoomed in about this much, it moves every 5 millimeters. If we zoom in further, you'll notice that it moves every 1. And if we go further back, it's going to move in 10 millimeter increments at some point. But just keep in mind that your position, your zoom level is going to determine that. It's not true if you're moving in plane, but if you are moving here, then it is going to determine that. And of course, you can manually enter it here, or you can go into numerical inputs and sort of add it there as well. But we're going to be doing this manually. Let's take a quick peek at smooth display, and you can see that it's sort of rolling out, and we will add some more detail on the bottom of this, but you can kind of see it's rolling out. And because of the curvature we added, this position here, I'm going to reset my rotation to that point by clicking the middle mouse button while holding down Shift. And you can kind of see that it's sort of twisting and flaring out. And at this stage, we're just looking for rough shapes, rough concept shapes. So don't get too hung up on the details and how smooth everything is at this point. Just remember that we're sort of building these out. Now, at this stage, we need to start to figure out if we're going to continue to extrude away from our lip here, or if we want to actually go ahead and create some new faces and then eventually add them here. So I think at this stage, the best thing for me to do is to start to build some new faces and not try to extrude all of this out. You can do it both methods. Either way is perfectly fine. We could also start with a big broad shape and then begin dividing it up. Again, any of those are going to be fine. It kind of just depends on what you're comfortable with. So for me, I'm going to start with a plane. Actually, you know what? Let's cancel that. I'm going to cancel the plane and I want to start with a face. And the reason I want to do this is because the face will actually let me snap to the mesh, which is a pretty cool feature. So using face, making sure that we have objects snap on, notice that there's an offset amount. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start building directly on this mesh. So I'm going to come to here and I'm going to just bring this out. I don't know the number of divisions I need yet, so I'm just going to sort of start building this. I'm going to come from here. I'm going to keep building out at least a few faces. I know that I want this shape to start getting larger here, and that's going to be a product of how we're going to control the curvature. I'm going to come to this point, come down a bit further, find that point there, and I'm going to say OK at that stage. It's hard to tell because it is hidden a little bit in the mesh because we don't have curvature to sort of, to work on that. But now we're going to go to modify, edit form. I'm going to select this body. I'm going to go to a front view. And even though I built it directly on the mesh, I'm just going to pull it out a little bit so that I can see it and go back to my multi-selection. So again, this is a quick way. That way we don't have to create the plane and then move it into position and reposition it. Using the face option when we have a reference mesh can be a little bit quicker. So now we've got the rough starting shape up here. This one's in box display, this one's in smooth, so I'm going to use Alt in 1, and that way I am in box display on this one as well. Again, don't worry about the fact that it's going underneath the fender. We're going to take care of that when we add more divisions to the shape. So here's where we need to start thinking about what we're going to do with this shape. All right, we got these little pieces here, which eventually, again, I said in this version, I might just do a bolt-on or a stick-on fender flare. And this is one where you sort of trim away and you leave a little bit. Just because it's going to be a little bit more difficult for us to create one that's attached. And we certainly can. But again, some of the data, some of the bolt holes are here, but I don't really know how that interface happens at the top. So most of these were spider or hardtop convertibles, and then I'm sure that there's some hardware underneath this lip here, but I don't really know how that how that all works. So I'm just gonna work off of the scan that I have here, and I'm gonna keep building. So we're gonna carry this down. We're going to sort of bring it down and start to build out where we're going to attach to the body, because that's obviously where we need to meet the body lines and match them. So I'm going to start with these two edges, and I'm going to hold down Alt, and I'm just going to extrude them down. And then I want to scale them in a little bit. I'm not worried about pivot points at this stage because I don't really know what the shape is going to look like. And I'm also not going to be too concerned about just moving in X or Y or X or Z. I'm just going to sort of begin getting it close, because remember, we're going to have to use pull to actually get this in the right position. And I think in order to match that shape, I know that I'm going to need more divisions. So I'm just going to go ahead and make that call now and just sort of put this about where the factory wheel arch is. I'm going to take these two. Let's go ahead and extrude this down. Another consideration that we should be thinking about at this stage is how and where it's going to attach to our fender. So obviously we have a lot more divisions on this lip, and that's eventually what we're going to get to on the shape of our body. But at this stage, we obviously don't have that. We would need to divide this one up here, and then we would need to bring this down. But the problem with that is it's going to be much harder for us to create the general shape that we're looking for. So even though we know that we're going to need more divisions, at this stage in the game, what we're going to do is keep it very general. So we're going to extrude again. This one you can see is starting to go into the body. So I'm going to switch to a front view, and I'm going to just pull it out a little bit. Note that some of these edges, like this edge, could go back. This vertex could go back because the fender's rolling back. Again, very general shape. We're not getting super detailed at this point. But as we start to get down, this is the stage where we really, really absolutely have to start thinking about the layout of all of these different quads. Like eventually we're going to have to probably have some triangles somewhere. But at this point, we need to think very clearly about how we're going to end up transitioning this forward. Because if we just take these two edges and we extrude them forward and we rotate them and we scale them down, we can begin to, to sort of create this shape. But then we have to begin to really think about how it's going to connect to this and how it's going to connect to this. So there are two options. I'm going to just go back to this point. There are two options. One is that we can take this one straight down, which means that this vertex will connect here, this one will connect here, and we'll split this one in the middle. And then we'll have to split this down the middle, we'll connect there and there. And then we begin extruding forward. Now what that means is we're going to have a star point. We're going to have 5 intersections that happen here. If we go back to that other method where we start extruding this forward and we rotate it and we scale it, and then we bring it forward again and we sort of try to match that door line, well, then the design implication is we've got 4 sides everywhere here, and this vertex will weld or these edges will end up going together. So when we put this together, we've got this 1 edge, 2 edge, 3 edge, 4 edge, this one going forward, and we're going to have to build a patch here. So this is a very blocked out design, and honestly at this stage I don't have a vision of which one will be a better choice. So because I don't really like twisting these shapes, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to carry this down. I'm going to sort of scale it to get it close, maybe rotate it a little bit. But I'm going to assume that then taking this face and extruding it forward is likely going to be the better option for me. I don't know that, and that's just one of those design decisions that you are going to have to make along the way. So not knowing that at this point, I'm just going to make the call, make the decision to go forward with this method. Now, it might bite me later, but I won't know until I try. So now we've sort of got the general shape of this, and you can see that we're sort of building it and we're working on the patch from the side. Now I want to begin to sort of get some of these edges where they need to be. So I'm going to begin pulling some of them out. Again, very general. We're not getting real specific yet. We're just getting them about where they're going to end up. So we can start to visualize this shape. We don't know at this point if we're just going to attach this to the fender or if we are going to potentially have a blend between it. That's going to be a design decision where we need to think about what the shape is going to look like. But we are now getting into a situation where we're going to have to have a star point somewhere. We're going to have to start breaking this up to go the other direction. And when you think about the shape of a car, typically that is going to happen somewhere around here. So this, I'm going to just go ahead and untake both of these. So at about this position, we are going to end up having a star point. I'm going to scale these together. Again, just get them kind of close. I'm going to scale them vertically. And what's going to happen is we're going to start dividing this up once we're happy with the shape. So we'll put a division right in the middle here. We'll put one right in the middle here. And then this vertex will connect here. This vertex will connect here. And we're going to end up having that star point because we're going to have to sort of change directions. The other option, or the other thing that we need to consider, is we might have a patch or a face that's 5 sides, so an n-gon, or 3 sides. We might have a triangle in there. Now, the reason that we would do this is, we just kind of have to think about how the shape is going to progress. We're not quite to that point yet. At this stage, I'm going to rotate around to the back. Notice that this stuff is still very close into the body. We only really need to keep it up close to the body here. So I'm going to begin taking this edge and this edge from the back, and I'm going to start pulling them out. I'm not spending a lot of time at this stage really worrying too much about exactly where everything is, because it's messy at this point. And the reason it's messy is because I don't know what the shape is going to look like. Once we're happy with the shape, that's when I'm going to start to take things like this vertex and I'm going to pull it up, and I'm going to try to get more of a straight edge here. And ultimately, what'll probably happen once we're happy with the shape is I'm going to end up deleting some of these edges and just adding ones back in that I know are very clean geometry. But again, right now it's the concept phase. In the concept phase, it's going to be messy. We're going to play around with the shape a little bit. And if we didn't have the scan data, if we weren't building off of a already pre-existing car, then the process is different. So I think it's important that we make sure that that's clear. If we were designing this car, we would have much fewer patches, much fewer faces, much fewer divisions at this stage, and we would add them in later. Because we already know the shape of the car, we know what we're attaching to, that means that we've got a little bit more to start with. So next, I'm just going to keep carrying this back. And again, you'll note that at this point, I didn't use just along Y. I'm just bringing it back. And I am keeping in mind where these things are going to connect. So remember that the broader the shape we have, the easier it's going to be for us to control. And then later on, downstream, we'll come back and we'll add a bit more to it. So for example, this edge, I'm going to pull this edge out. Again, keeping with the fender flare, but this one goes back toward the car body. Big, broad shapes, and then we'll divide them up later once we're happy. And actually, with that in mind, let's go ahead and let's go back to a right view. I'm going to take this edge, and I'm going to delete it. And the reason I'm deleting it is because this is a much cleaner shape, and I don't need to worry about all those divisions. So if I try to make this a smooth display, we've got some pinching going on here because we need some more detail, but we can kind of start to see the shape building out. So we rotate this around, we're flaring out, and we're starting to build the rest of the shape. As we get closer to the back of the car, we need to think about where and how it's going to terminate. So if you look at some of the DTM cars or some of the old race cars from the 80s, especially Porsche like 924s, they had these massive over fenders, and they still had the stock body underneath, part of the homologation rules, I think. And so, you had the original taillight, and then you just sort of had this big opening in the back. And I kind of like that look. I'm a fan of the cars from the 80s, the big boxy sort of flares and that sort of design aesthetic. So I'm probably going to continue on with that. So we're going to, have this big over fender that's going to connect back to here. But then we're probably going to leave it open at the back so we can kind of see inside of it. Again, just a design aesthetic thing, kind of, just from what I like. Obviously, if you want to connect it back to the body, you do something very similar like this. So we're getting closer, and what I want to do at this point is I want to carry this edge, the shape of this edge, I want it to be more in line with the taillight. So I want to select it, and this is one of those cases where we are going to reset the pivot point to the top, and then we're going to use rotate and scale. And what I'm looking to do at this point is I'm looking to rotate it and keep it so that this point is where it stays or where it's supposed to be. And then I also want to try to make sure that this is fairly horizontal. So that looks pretty good. Obviously, with no divisions here, we can't continue to extrude down, but the shape at this point is starting to look pretty good. I like the shape. I like where it's going. Now I want to spend a little bit more time fixing this shape here before I start to add more divisions. And a way that we can do this is if we're happy with this front edge, we can go ahead and double click on this and simply delete it. Now, if we double click this edge, or if we make some selections here, it's a little tricky because this edge doesn't carry all the way through, but we can come to insert edge. I'm going to put it at -0.5. And it looks like we're going to want to select this edge here. We're going to have to do it manually just because of the way that the loop is laid out. And we're going to do a simple single insertion. And you notice it didn't work. Let's try again. Let's try insert edge. Let's try if we do +0.5. Okay, now it's showing it there. So now we've added one that's exactly in the middle. And what this allows me to do is go to insert point. And I can go from here and I can find the midpoint of that edge. And I can repeat that process down here and just find the midpoint and say, okay. So that was a lot easier than us spending the time to try to get it nice and even. And this will give us a better result, honestly. So the smoothness that we'll get from this will give us a better result. Let's go ahead and go back to box display. I haven't saved this, so let's do a save, make sure we don't lose anything. So as I step back and look at this, I think that this edge needs to be higher. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this one and I'm going to delete it. I'm going to take this edge and just move it up vertically. And that's about where I want it. I'm going to reset the pivot point to here. Then I want to scale it down so that it matches the taillight shape pretty good. And then I want to go to insert point, and I'm going to go from here to here. And that doesn't look very good. So I want to actually take both of those. I'm going to delete them. And then I'm going to go insert point from here, and I'm just going to go straight across and add that back in. So again, deleting and adding those edges and the insert points are going to be important. So there's a pinch that happens here. And again, when we look at the reason that these happen, it's just because at this point, we don't have enough additional geometry to help control the curvature. So we need to divide this up and we need to clean it up a little bit more. But I think before we get into that, I want to start to try and connect it to the rest of the car body. And I think that's going to be an important thing at this stage. So I'm going to insert an edge right in the middle. And then I'm going to start to use weld vertices. So I want to bring these out to the skirt where it goes. And I'm going to take this one here. And let's go ahead and take this one to here. We'll take that one to there. And we're going to stop there. Now this is probably going to prevent me from going back into smooth display mode. No, it still is able to do it. So now we're back in smooth display. We need to work on everything else that connects this together. So this section here, if we're happy with the shape, what we want to do is we want to use insert edge exact. If we think that the shape could still use a little bit of work, then we would come back and we would just use simple, and that would be fine. But I'm going to continue to work my way around the fender and figure out where things need to be. So insert edge, I'm going to go here, and I'm actually going to do a simple but on both because I know that I'm going to need more divisions up here, and we'll say okay. Then we'll go to modify and weld vertices. And always note that the second selection is going to be the 2. It's always going to connect to your last selection. So I'm going to make sure that I do that and keep this portion of the wheel arch consistent. All right, so now we're at the point where we've connected to the car. Some of this doesn't look great. If I go to smooth display, it's probably okay, but obviously it could use a little bit more work. Remember, we're just roughing out the shape at this point. Don't be too concerned with how that looks. If you want to fix any of these internal edges, then again, what we can do is we can just delete them, come back and use insert point, and then use the surrounding vertices to help connect them. I think this vertex needs to go down a little bit. This is one area where programs like Blender have Fusion beat, because you can take that vertex and you can slide it on an edge. Fusion 360 has modify and slide edge, but it doesn't work, at least at this point, it does not work on a vertex. So we do have that limitation there. Okay, so now we're starting to get some of the shape built out. I'm going to go ahead and do another quick save to make sure I don't lose anything. As I'm looking at this, the next thing I notice is I think I really want to pull this down a bit more. Maybe take this vertex back out, try to keep that straight line from the side. Again, we're going to end up pulling all this to the body, but I think that's going to allow me to build out some more of this shape. So from the side, I'm going to start to potentially modify these vertices. And again, using things like scale are going to be really important to keep things consistent. At this stage, I'm still kind of concepting because I don't have a good idea of what I want this to look like. So I'm still sort of playing around with the shapes and I'm not too concerned. But then I'm going to take this entire thing and I'm just going to extrude out another loop. And I'm going to do this by scaling it. Again, we could use like reset pivot point. We could work on the patch layout. But again, I'm still kind of working on the concept and I'm not too concerned. But this is going to give me an extra edge or an extra level of control to kind of match the car body. So if you have trouble seeing this, you can always rotate and pull these out in front of the design, out in front of the mesh in this case, but I kind of know where they are, so I'm just going to keep working on moving them around little by little. This is probably more fine detail than we really need, but again, I want to go ahead and just manipulate what I can and add that level of control. So we're going to start building that flare out. And what this lets us do is it lets us take this loop here and it lets us pull it away from the body. And what this is going to allow us to do is create that more dramatic sort of intake scoop look. So we're going to go around that intake scoop and sort of accentuate that shape. We're going to sort of pull it out from there. And this allows me to sort of flare the fender out a bit sooner. So if we go back in box display, again, what we can do is we can take some of these edges and we can delete them. And what'll happen, this might be good to view from this angle, and what's going to happen is that shape is going to sort of fill itself in. It's going to get smoother. And if we take a look at it in smooth display, because we have these T-points, things need to be fixed, but now it's flaring out a bit smoother. And what I can do is I can go back and I can use insert edge in the middle to get some of these more symmetric. I am going to pull some of this stuff around before I do that. And hopefully it's starting to make sense when we're looking at the way that these shapes progress. You can see it's wider here and it sort of gets narrower, it tapers around this, and it can get wider again if we need it to. But you can see that it's very gradual. And the gradual transition between these is what's going to be important. This edge right here, I might want to pull down just a little bit more. And what I'm looking at here is these are all going to be a consistent width here, but you'll notice that these taper out and get a bit wider. We could add more divisions and make these more consistent to where this came straight forward, and we might end up doing that in reality. But at this stage in the game, I don't necessarily know that it's needed, but you can kind of see how that looks. If we bring these down and we start to make them horizontal from where they're attaching to. And of course, we could do that by selecting the vertices and using scale. Let's go ahead and undo, hit scale, and you can see that we can use that. But it's going to move this unless you reset the pivot point there. So these are all little like nuances that we need to be mindful of when we start these. Now we need to go back and reconnect this edge. So we're going to go modify, insert edge, pick the ones where we want to insert. We're going to do a single insertion. And I want to put it right in the middle there, right there. And then we'll go back at the very end, we'll use insert point to go between those. And then we'll use insert point here. All right, let's take a quick look, smooth display. Not too bad, could use some more detail work, but again, we're not to the detail point. If you have an idea of what you want something to look like, it's quite a bit easier. But if you're kind of playing around with these shapes, it takes a little bit for us to really work on it. So I think what I'm going to do for the rest of this video, I don't think we're going to get this done in this video, but I think what I want to do is I want to finish out connecting it to this portion. And then in the next video, we'll really focus more on the details, the higher level of details, the shape, the transitions, all those things that are really going to make or break this. Because otherwise, it's just going to look like you just took a big blob of clay and stuck it to the side of the car and just melted it. So we're going to add more detail. We're just not quite there. So the next step in this process is, again, to sort of figure out all of these divisions. There's quite a bit going on here. And we're going to have to break this up, obviously, and we're going to have to extrude all of these out. So I think what I want to do is I want to skip these two right here, and then I'm going to take two and make sure I'm selecting edges. I'm going to take those four, and I'm just going to extrude them up. So I'm going to extrude them up. I'm going to scale them so that they're horizontal. Again, we can manually enter 0. Then I'm going to say OK. And what this is allowing me to do is it's allowing me to figure out where these divisions need to be. So if I select these two edges and I go to Insert Edge, that's on the wrong side, so I want this to be minus 0.5. And now I divided this right up in the middle. Now if I select it, I can go to Insert Edge. I'm going to do both this time, put it right in the middle. And again, you can see I'm starting to make these divisions. I'm going to do it again, Insert Edge, both. And I'm starting to make it line up where I want it to. Now, of course, we can do more work and we can manipulate things. Like this edge right here could probably shift forward a good bit. So if I'm not happy with its location, I can delete it. Then I can use insert point, and I can sort of pick where I want that to be. I'm going to put it right in the middle. And then this edge, I'm going to now delete. And then I can insert an edge. This time will be a single. And if it goes to the wrong side, make sure that it's a positive value. So in this case, even though the display shows it there, it wants to be a positive value. Now we're able to sort of readjust and manipulate these without having to move them around. The main takeaway from that, and the main reason that you would want to do that, is because if you start moving these edges and these vertices around, what you're going to end up doing is you're going to end up losing the shape. And when you add them in and you let the software sort of push things where it wants them to be, that's the situation where it's much happier. The geometry is better. And now we need to go back and we need to think about our sort of original design philosophy and the fact that we wanted these lines to point to the center of the wheel. And that's going to be true for the vertice at the end of this as well. I'm going to try to manipulate this, and you'll note that this is almost a straight line to there. And if I take this one, that's pretty close. This one is going to be off, but we can slide that edge over. This one here is pretty close, but it needs to go to the right a little bit. And then this one here ends up going like that. So again, we're pretty close. And the way that we would fix that in this case is we can actually come in and use slide edge. Now, slide edge is a good option for this. We can figure out where we want that, and then we can place it there. And this one here, I'll do the same thing. We could use the right-click marking menu and just repeat it, and then we'll do that, and we'll say OK. So again, we're getting much closer. Now we can use modify weld vertices, and I'm happy with the location of these. So I'm going to take the Fender flare extension and go to that and that. Push this one over here, this one here, and that one there. All right, so getting closer. We're going to go to a smooth display real quick just to make sure that that looks okay. And once we're happy with the layout, again, we can always go back and delete edges and add them back in. So again, still very much a concept stage. We're still just trying to rough out the shape and figure out what we want all the divisions to look like. You can already see that it is taking shape and things look pretty good. It's flaring out from the side skirt. You can see that this section all looks pretty consistent until we get right into these two faces here. This looks pretty good. I think that this edge I'd likely want to bring in a bit more. And we can do that by selecting it and going to slide edge. Even though it's attached to something, we can move it over until we're happy. It's really hard to see on the screen, and it's probably extremely difficult and impossible to see on the video, but it actually shows you a preview of where that edge is. And then, we can sort of just remanipulate those. Same thing with this one. If I'm not happy with it, repeat slide edge, move it until it looks like it's about in line where we would want it, and then we can sort of fix that. I'll do the same thing here. Just while we're here, let's go ahead and just pull it over just a little bit. All right. Now I'm going to have to put another edge right in the middle, and then I need to fill this in. Now this can be done a couple different ways. I'm going to use modify and bridge. I really like to avoid merge edge. I'm not happy with the results. I don't think that it really does a good job of putting the vertices together if things aren't really symmetric. So bridge or manually extruding and using weld vertices are usually my go-tos. It's not to say that it doesn't work, but that's just me. So I'm going to go from this edge to this edge here, and I need to make sure the number of faces matches the number of faces that we're transitioning to. I'm going to say OK, and you can already see that it wasn't able to cleanly make those work. So I do have to go in and say weld vertices. I'm going to take the one from the bridge and I'm going to put it there. And then make sure that these two are connected. If you box select and you get two selections here, then you'll know that those two are sort of missing. Another thing that you can do is you can just try to move one of them and see if another one is left behind. It seems to be okay. So now we've connected that portion. We need to, work on this. As we look at this visually, what I want you to see is the fact that these seem more bunched or pinched together and these seem wider. So the transition really needs to be worked on in this area. Not something that we need to do at this stage, but it's something that we will want to come back and make sure that we work on, because this one kind of goes out to the left, back to the right, then up. This one goes pretty straight. This one sort of comes into the right slightly and then up to the left. And then these ones sort of bouncing around. So if we need to transition from a completely straight line to sort of a, an arrow or a V, we want to do that gradually. So we're already at 45 minutes, and I know that this process takes quite a while, but I do think it's important. Now, if I were to just model this without trying to discuss all these little points, it's probably a 10 or 15-minute process to get to this stage. So it is obviously, it's much quicker when we're not discussing it. It is also much quicker if you have an idea of what you want something to look like. If you have a sketch or a reference picture, it can kind of give you a good idea of where detail needs to be and where you can sort of avoid it. We're not done. Obviously, we need to do a little bit of work. So I think I'm going to just try to, hopefully speed through a little bit more at this point and wrap the end of this video up. But I'm going to try to discuss everything I'm doing and why. I want to extrude this out. I'm going to scale it vertically. And again, we can manually put in 0 here. And what I'm looking to do is I'm looking to build the end of the flare. So I want to carry this down, and I'm going to carry it all the way to here. And again, we're going to end at the bumper. We're going to use kind of like that 80s, DTM, or those old Porsches and those old cars that have those massive flares on them to fit huge tires, and you can kind of still see the stock body underneath. I did a quick search just in case you guys are thinking I'm crazy and you don't really know what I'm talking about. But here's an idea. And a lot of the newer body kits are kind of doing this as well. But these massive sort of over fenders that have the exposed rear taillights and stock body, they let you do some really cool stuff. We can put some aero details inside of here. But so that's kind of the intent or the idea that I was talking about, leaving the back of it open as kind of the style that we're going for. So just note that that option is there, and let's go ahead and get back into Fusion. So now that we have this edge, we need to figure out the rest of these and how to connect them. So I'm going to skip this one because I already have this stuff patched here, and I'm just going to take these two and I'm going to extrude them out, and I'm going to scale them in the Y direction. I'm going to scale them vertically in the Z direction and then just sort of move them around. So what I'm kind of thinking here is that these obviously need to connect. And I'm looking to see how many faces are going to be over here. So we've got 1, 2, 3, and 4 if we connect these two vertices together. And I think that's going to be the best option. So modify, weld, going to move this new one over to the first one because I know that's straight back. And then I'm going to move this to here. I'm happy with its location. And now that I've got that just single boundary, I'm going to say fill, let it fill that hole, and now we're good. So again, smooth display from the back. Got this massive sort of opening or cavity. Obviously, we will want to connect it back to the body, but the massive opening, let's go ahead and use Control 4 to get rid of the edges. You can see that there are some creases here that we need to work on, but that is going to be the general shape. And as we're looking at this, you can see some areas like this right here has got sort of this weird thing that's happening graphically. If we bring the edges back, that's our star point. And that's one of those reasons why we try to avoid those star points, is because they will cause problems like that. And a way for us to get around this is to use utilities and repair body and see if we can let it fix that star point, let it auto fix. Sometimes there are other ways that we can do it, but we might need to consider changing the patch or changing the edge layout and the edge flow in order to alleviate that problem. That is a problem for future us. There are a couple issues that we need to fix, but what we've done at this stage is we've roughed out the shape. Now, the next part of the process is to go back and refine it. So we're going to be adding detail to connect the bottom of the flare underneath the car, which means pushing some of this back. We're going to connect the back to the car, push it back over, and then we're going to begin fixing some of the patches, fixing some of the layouts, and then adding in those details. And the very last step of this process is going to be to pull or attach what we have here to the mesh. So we're trying to keep it fairly close to its final position, but we're not attaching it yet. We could, because it's not parametric, so it could be undone. But you can see that we're just sort of mimicking the body lines, and we're using that as sort of inspiration. But here is the flare. You can see that it's sort of coming away from the body. Everything looks pretty good so far. And that's almost an hour of, of us going through this process. Hopefully it's helpful. Hopefully you can see the concept phase, the box layout, the approach of creating the fender lip, sort of extruding it out, and then building the rest of the shape out before we connect things together. And hopefully, you know, if you really just take away one thing, is to understand that there are plenty of times where we're just going to have to delete some of the stuff we've done and sort of reconfigure it. And that's fine. It doesn't have to be a one and done scenario. There is very few times that I have ever gone through the process and done something perfectly right the first time and not had to go back and make adjustments and make changes. So at this stage in the game, let's leave it here where it is in this sort of initial shape roughed out concept phase. The next stage, what we're going to do is we're going to try to fix or alleviate some of the surface issues that we have. So things like the star point here, we're going to potentially add some more divisions to help the shape, because we've got this one large face here, and then we've got all these that are sort of competing for geometry. We could crease or add more edges when we get a little bit closer. And then once we get sort of all of those little details ironed out and we're happy with the layout, that's the phase where we then go back and we start to add extra edges to control geometry and add more features or add more details to really make this a unique item and not just look like a blob stuck on the side of the car. So that's going to be the fun part when we get there. We're not quite there yet, and if we add any detail at this stage, we're really just making our job that much more difficult. So if you followed along this long, almost an hour, then congratulations. There should be some sort of award for that. But if you have any questions, obviously let me know. I do plan to carry this on. I don't know how long it'll take, but I imagine that we'll do at least one more video, if not two, just to get all the details right on this and talk about pushing it to the, or pulling it to the mesh, I should say, since that's the tool name, and making sure that we are really happy with where all the edges are. So again, that'll probably come. I plan to do a video a day on these, unless I get really excited and I end up recording a couple. But plan to see that tomorrow. And if you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the video. And as always, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.